The reason I wanted to implement content-specific reading in my classroom is because I felt it was very important to create an environment where my students could learn and practice strategies and skills that would make them more confident readers. I always knew reading was a very important part of any classroom, and I knew from college that I wanted to implement content-specific reading somewhere in my science classes in the future. So how I began was just giving my students content-specific reading, whether it be a research article or we were reading out of the text. I felt like that was awesome that my kids were reading in class. But I didn't know if I was actually making them better readers or if I was just having them read because I knew it was good practice. I always knew reading was a very important part of any classroom, and I knew from college that I wanted to implement content-specific reading somewhere in my science classes in the future. So how I began was just giving my students content-specific reading, whether it be a research article or we were reading out of the text. I felt like that was awesome that my kids were reading in class. But I didn't know if I was actually making them better readers or if I was just having them read because I knew it was good practice. So one way that I took that further was I started making graphic organizers for them so they could actively read, whether it be a textbook or an article. The next unit, I would make their organizers with them. So rather than me making an organizer based on the reading and handing it out to the students, they actually got to take ownership and take part in this. So they were learning about what makes a good graphic organizer and how to base your graphic organizer off of what you're reading. The unit after that then, the students actually got to take full ownership of their graphic organizers. So they were able to preview the reading on their own, and each of them made individual graphic organizers that worked best for them. So what does this look like in my classroom? First, I always give the students a purpose for what they're reading. So why are they reading this and how will it apply to their life? Will they ever use this when they leave West Dubuque? So once I talk to them about the purpose, I kind of let them know about what they'll be reading about, so how the information is presented. Are we learning about a process? Are we learning about specific information? Are the kids going to be learning about a research article? This will allow them to decide which type of graphic organizer they use. The students, based on practice they have certain graphic organizers they feel work best for cause and effect, certain graphic organizers they feel like work best for processes, for things that they're comparing. So that way when they actually get the text to preview it, which comes next, they know what to look for when setting up their graphic organizer. Let's just say today you are going to role play, I know this is scary, being a parent. Okay? So let's say you have a spouse and that spouse tells you, my brother had cystic fibrosis. The second thing we do is we look at what type of information is provided in the reading. So are they looking at a cause and effect? Are they looking at a process? All of this will help them decide what type of graphic organizer they want to use. Graphic organizer where you're comparing and contrasting.
Like the two circles.
Okay, you could do a Venn diagram. How about for a process? What are some ways we've created graphic organizers for processes? You could do a flow chart. What else? A chain reaction. Cause and effect. So once I've kind of presented this information to them, they're actually allowed to preview the reading. I'm going to let you preview this text and start to kind of create what you think you might want to use for your graphic organizer, okay?
I took all the subheadings and I put them down boxes. So, your fibrosis, feelings risk for it, how it affects kids, identifying a child with it, and then treating kids. And then I'll put down like the main facts of each of those.
Okay, good, cool. Yours looks a little bit different. Talk to us about how you set yours up.
I tried to come up into.
The students have had time to preview the text and create their graphic organizer or format their graphic organizer is when they actually get to read and actively read while they're looking at their graphic organizer. This looks different based on the reading. Sometimes students will read in pairs, sometimes students read individually. I started giving my students the choice, and now almost all of my students choose to read individually because that's what works best for them.
What about the
After the students have a chance to read, the fifth thing I do is we have a discussion about the reading. So this often starts with difficult words that kind of inhibited us from fully understanding the reading because we didn't know what they were. So a lot of times these end up being words that all of the students have in common that they didn't understand. So there's a few ways then that we figure out what these words mean. Sometimes we chunk the words and use our prior knowledge to figure out what those difficult words mean. Sometimes the students will use visuals to try and figure out or remember what the words mean. And in many cases, these students are using context clues. So trying to look at the words and sentences around that difficult word or difficult long vocabulary word that they're not sure of, and they're able to kind of infer what that word means. So they might not be able to tell you an exact definition, but maybe they can give you information like, I think this is something that treats cancer because of the information around that word in the sentence.
Completely through, but I do want to kind of take some time to talk about this. So, a few of the difficult words that I saw were transmembrane, meconium, epithelial, carrier, pilocarpine, and genitourinary. Epithelial. Epithelial.
It's a type of cell.
Okay. It makes your sweat glands. How did you know that, Devin? Where did you find that information? Yeah, it was, Devin used context clues to figure out what that word is.
After we talk about the difficult words, this is when we can get into the main ideas of the reading. So what were your biggest takeaways? How do you think this can apply? How can you use this information? And this goes back to bringing back the why of the article. So I bring back the purpose. So this is why we read this, and what are some things that you took away that you think you can use?
After reading this, what do you think? So put yourself back in the shoes of you're a parent who just found out that your kid or your future child could potentially have cystic fibrosis. What are some of the main things or main takeaways you would have after reading this? So what are the most important things that you found about how you think you're going to be able to cope with having this be a possibility?
What we do after we're able to discuss and bring back the connection is we actually do a reading check. So this is how I check for the students' comprehension. I usually ask them a question, give them all a post-it note, a note card, whatever works, and I ask them a question dealing with the main idea of a passage. So for some it might be, why are some children born with cystic fibrosis? When I have these all at the end of class, I'm able to split them into students that were able to comprehend the passage and students that weren't. And there's a few things I do after I give this reading comprehension check. So one is I track the data. This is for me and the student. So one, I want to make sure that the students are understanding and comprehending what we read. The second reason I do this is because I want to make sure that these strategies and skills I'm giving them are actually working. So I began tracking data when I chose the reading and I chose the organizers. And I wanted to make sure that as the students began to take ownership of this, that their reading comprehension was staying either the same or getting even better as we went on. So if I find that I have a large percentage of students who didn't comprehend the data, something I might do is address those misconceptions, which really in a lot of cases is why there was a misunderstanding. It's because there was a misconception somewhere in the article. I also might take 5 minutes of the next class just to review the main ideas for them and try and connect the reading to whatever we've talked about in class previously or whatever we will talk about in class.
I think our most important takeaway that I want you guys to do for your reading check is, how would a child get cystic fibrosis? If you had to explain to somebody why your child has cystic fibrosis, I want you to explain it to them. You could use a Punnett square. You could talk about carriers. Whatever you need to do to explain to somebody why a child could have cystic fibrosis.
I think that this has made a huge impact on students in my classroom. They're able to actively read, choose graphic organizers. They enjoy reading because they feel like they're good at it and they feel like they can. And it really helps us, not only in our class, but even looking at a test or looking at articles now, they know that they're looking for difficult words. And now even when we're reading out of our textbook, they do things like look for difficult words or highlight summaries because they're able to actually apply these strategies. So I know that not only is this making an impact in my classroom, but I think this is making an impact for these students and their education as a whole because they're able to apply these practices and strategies to the rest of their lives. I think it's also important to know that the students feel that this is very important too. So I've heard students say things like, the reason Ms. Kleesner does this is because it's preparing us for college, or the reason Ms. Kleesner does this is because it's making us better readers. So the students also know that implementing reading and the ability to read and practicing reading is important for the rest of their lives.